understand. And Mr. Z, what I like about his stuff is he tries to paint a picture towards people about societal pressures
Mm-hmm.
and how it's affected people, and that you really need to take a step back.
In light of Chris Smalls, a black man, unionizing the first Amazon warehouse, it was very important for me to bring in a conversation about some of the extenuating circumstances and outside pressures that's leading many people, namely black people, to sound the way they sound about wealth and about income, and why black people are so aggravated with other black people when it comes to these things. This conversation can go into many different directions. Black women in luxury, how black men sound when they speak about cryptocurrency and Bitcoin, how black people sound about wealth once again and income. And so I want to play this clip for you guys. It's about 5 or so minutes long. Please listen to the whole thing, like, share, and subscribe. And we're going to have a conversation about why, or one of the reasons why, a very important reason, but one of the reasons why black people sound the way they sound about everything from their intimate relationships to their platonic relationships with friends and family and associates and siblings and loved ones, right? Children. And I'll pause right here. Let's listen to this clip and we'll come in on the back end and have a conversation about what we just heard. I'll pause right here.
The Powell Memorandum was a corporate call to arms that would mobilize the capitalist forces against the general population. Out of this memo, the modern conservative movement would rise, giving birth to the neoliberal era starting under Carter, accelerating under Reagan and Clinton, and finally culminating in the election of Donald Trump and his cabinet appointees. Lewis F. Powell Jr. graduated from Harvard Law School and became a renowned corporate lawyer and lobbyist for enormous business firms like the Philip Morris Tobacco Company. In 1971, Powell wrote a secret memo entitled The Attack on Free Enterprise System to the executive director of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. It was a reaction to the radicalization of America in the 1960s, where women, minorities, workers, consumer advocate groups, and the anti-war movement became active participants in the democratic process. The tone of the memo reflected the paranoia of the anti-New Deal corporate business interests and the failure of the Nixon administration to create an atmosphere conducive to corporate control. It called for business to discredit Ralph Nader, smash unions, take control of the political system, indoctrinate and mobilize young conservatives, expand the pro-business media, and take over college campuses and courts on all levels. In the memo, Powell wrote, "We are not dealing with the sporadic or isolated attacks from a relatively few extremists or even from the minority socialist cadre. Rather, the assault on the enterprise system is broadly based and consistently pursued. It is gaining momentum and converts." Business sprang to life politically. 1 year later, the Business Roundtable was created. It was the first business association whose membership was restricted to top CEOs. In 1971, there were 175 business headquarters in D.C. A decade later, there were over 2,400. Powell warned, if you do not know your senators on a first-name basis, you are not doing an adequate job for your stockholders. The nation's most powerful CEOs began to have face-to-face meetings with congressional leaders, and by the time Reagan became president, business had a ratio of 130 lobbyists for every one member of Congress. Later that year, Powell was rewarded for his efforts to reinvigorate business and, on December 9, 1971, was appointed to the Supreme Court. As an associate justice, Powell did what he could to advance the corporate agenda. In 1976, the Supreme Court reviewed the now famous case Buckley v. Vallejo, in which they ruled money was speech. In decades to come, this decision would give corporate America unprecedented power, ratcheting up the cost of elections, driving both parties into the pockets of the ruling class, and undermining the progress made by radicals in the 60s. This new assault on democracy, which some called the revolt of the bosses, was launched as a full-scale political rebellion by American business who took over U.S. politics. Conservative think tanks and organizations such as the Heritage Foundation, the Cato Institute, the John Birchers, and the Federalist Society would rise and shape public consciousness to this very day. It would usher in an era of deregulation, privatization, trickle-down economics, the offshoring of production, the destruction of labor unions, and the monopolistic corporate consolidation. The period after World War II and before the Powell Memo was known as the Golden Age of Capitalism or the Great Compression. It was a time of egalitarian growth where the poorest 20% of Americans experienced the same economic rewards as the richest 20%. But after corporate America mobilized, they were able to transfer the wealth from the working class into their own pockets. From 1945 to 1973, worker productivity rose 96% while the median wage rose 94%. However, from 1974 to the present, worker productivity increased 80%, while the median wage increased a mere 10%. And while wages stagnated, CEO compensation rose 937%. In the 1970s, corporate profits made up 6% of GDP, while wages made 52%. Today, corporate profits account for 12% of GDP, while wages account for 46%. With a $17 trillion GDP, that is $1 trillion that was taken from the working class and given to the ruling class. Venture capitalist and billionaire Nick Hanauer said, "So $1 trillion that used to be wages are now profits. That $1 trillion isn't profit because it has to be or needs to be or should be. They're profits because people like me prefer them to be." The assault by business replaced traditional American values such as thrift, self-effacement, and the community with corporate values such as greed, consumerism, and the cult of the self. Regional identity, their own unique history and traditions, and a decentralized press that gave citizens a voice in their own communities were all destroyed and replaced with the homogenization of corporate culture. The idea was to gut non-market institutions, break down solidarity, and weaken communities. Author Robert McChesney summed up the contemporary effects of the Powell Memorandum saying, "Instead of citizens, it produces consumers. Instead of communities, it produces shopping malls. The net result is an atomized society of disengaged individuals who feel demoralized and socially powerless. It reinforces the irrelevance of electoral politics to most people and assures the maintenance of unquestioned corporate rule." And despite the corporate takeover of America, we are constantly told, by the corporations that own the media, that America should be run like a business. The fact
that people don't understand. And Mr. Z, what I like about his stuff is he tries to paint a picture towards people about societal pressures and how it's affected people, and that you really need to take a step back.
We're going to mention this also. When listening to this, think of the precariousness of the gig economy, right? Of having no floor and no HR if something happens and someone accuses you of something or blames you of something. Number one. Number two, also think of the idea that politics is for the rich and wealthy and well-connected and not for the poor who need it as a buffer from the rich and wealthy. Where did this idea of politics being for the rich and wealthy come from? And is it actually beneficial for black people who are largely poor, working class, and lower middle class? For those of you that are wondering why this is important, because you have lottery dreams. Well, this is important because this is why you're being paid $11, $12, $13, $15, $19 an hour instead of $30 an hour, $25 an hour, $35 an hour, $40 an hour. This is important because this also trickles down, trickle down economics. This also trickles down into your relationships, into your intimate relationships, right? This trickles down into your relationship with your wife, with your children, right? With your husband, right? With your friends and your associates and your parents. These particular people planned this out and executed a way of screwing over everyone in the working class, and that has had very, very serious effects, irrevocable effects on everyone in the working class, poor, lower middle, even solidly middle class people. This is important, as you can see, because Lewis Powell became a Supreme Court judge. As you can see, wealthy people knew that they took, and it says $1 trillion, it was over $1 trillion out of the economy and made it their profits. And as the billionaire said, we didn't have to do that. We did it because we wanted to do it, because it benefits us. Also, that's the money that you would use in your leisure time to protest, right? What people really miss is the 1960s put a real hurting on America. From about the mid 50s to the early 70s, put a real hurting on America, right? Everything from civil rights, black rights, to LGBTQ rights, to women's rights, the hippie movement, right? Environmental rights. The uber wealthy saw that as an attack on them. They saw it as around every corner some communists or socialists, so they said. And so, as I said earlier, they decided to execute a plan to take all of that back. All the rights, all the labor rights going from the mid and late 19th century, all the civil rights, and turn everybody into consumers. So you're not fighting to be free anymore. You're fighting to make money so you could spend money. And that's where we are now. How many of us are actually fighting to be free and not just fighting to have more money so we could spend more money on supposed nicer things? How many of us think of freedom as the ability to buy nice things and to defecate on people downstream? Right? You see, that Bentley truck is liberating. That Maybach is liberating. Maybach, excuse me. As liberating. Right? So this is why it was important for me to bring this to you guys. To have a larger conversation of why do people sound the way they sound. This also can dovetail into black women in luxury. We can also have a larger conversation about Bitcoin and brothers' obsession with cryptocurrency. Right? There's so much that you can extrapolate from this and why people sound the way they sound in the 21st century, in 2021, and 2022, and 2023 going forward. So I'll pause right here. I think that video said pretty much everything it needed to say, right? I'll pause right here. Y'all let me know what y'all think in the comments. I definitely want to hear from people to see what you guys think in the comments. And that's it from Mr. Z. Later.